Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the virtual Mary Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Chris Agard, and I'm one of your three Ath Fellows. After the Black Lives Matter demonstrations across the planet and around the world last summer, a wide array of organizations and their leaders evaluated their own internal issues with race. All sorts of companies made efforts to strengthen their diversity and inclusion efforts. Today's guest, Brian Stafford, was not exempt from such efforts as he sought to make positive strides from the top at Diligent Corporation, of which he is the CEO. In the aftermath of the summer of 2020, Diligent has called on its network of board members and executives to accelerate diversity and inclusion initiatives. Tonight, he will share details on these aims and reflect on the role companies should play to create a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive society. Brian Stafford is CEO of Diligent Corporation, one of the largest software as a service companies on the planet. He is responsible for all day-to-day operations with a focus on accelerating global growth and incorporating scale into the business in order to seamlessly manage growth. Previously, Stafford served as a partner at McKinsey and Company, where he founded their growth stage tech practice and was also the founder of CarOrder. Using the Q&A function, we will accept questions throughout the program to be posed towards the end of the event. Preference will go to students, so when you send in a question, please state your affiliation with the college, student, faculty, parent, alumni, friend. As always, I must remind you that audio and visual recording are strictly prohibited. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Stafford to the virtual Athenaeum.
Welcome, Brian Stafford, to Claremont McKenna College and the virtual Athenaeum. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. Well, we're really interested in hearing a lot about this Modern Leadership Initiative, but since we have you here virtually, I thought we'd start off with a little bit of a background about yourself. How did your journey to CEO of Diligent, how you got interested in this important issue of diversifying corporate boards, and lessons along the way.
Sure. So let me kind of jump in there, I guess. Lot of questions in the first question. My journey to becoming CEO. I actually, out of undergrad, I went to school in Philadelphia, and out of undergrad, I joined a tech company in Austin. I knew I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. And at the time, it was before Austin was, a big deal. And I joined a company where I had a unique opportunity in my first year there to start and run a spin-off company. And so I'd always kind of wanted to know I want to do something entrepreneurial. Maybe I didn't have the same guts or chutzpah that other people do to just go at it, at blind faith. So I launched a spinoff from a company, and at basically at the age of 23, 24, I had taken 3-4 years and built a company up from nothing into 350 people and actually 100 million of revenue. That all sounds good and glamorous and exciting, but then the dot-com bubble burst, and so did we as a company. And we went through a few painful sets of cuts and great learning experience. I always thought I wanted to run something, but being less successful than I aspired, I decided to do what any good student does, which is you go back to school. And I went back to school to get a PhD. But I realized that I probably didn't have the intestinal fortitude to see that through. So I ended up doing what any good student who wasn't sure what they wanted to do next was. I joined a consulting firm, and I spent 10 years of my life at McKinsey and Company. The general idea behind it was, I had started a company and had not been successful. The company was more hype than substance. And I wanted to learn how other companies were successful, and then eventually take that learning and apply it to actually being more successful running something. And so after 10 years, which is probably too long, I had a unique opportunity to join Diligent as its CEO just about 6 years ago from now. And as many as you all know, what is it? Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And it turns out the person who was my CFO at the company I'd started that had failed miserably had gone on to be CFO of many more successful companies. We always had a good relationship, and after he was done being the CFO of multiple companies, he became an audit committee chair, which is the person who audit committee is the committee of the board that helps to make sure the finances of the board are correct. And he had become the audit committee chair of many boards, and he looked me up, and he was on he was vice chair and head of the audit committee at Diligent. And he said, have a unique opportunity for you if you're willing to stop doing the whole consulting thing and actually go back to, rolling up your sleeves and, getting stuff done. I became absolutely blown away by what I thought was a hidden gem in Diligent, and was thrilled to jump in and be CEO of Diligent.
Sounds like
I can take wherever you'd like to steer me. I can talk a little bit about Diligent. I can talk a little bit about diversity and modern leadership, which I'd like to as well. So
yeah, absolutely. We're definitely heading in that direction. But our primary audience are students, and one of the things that students wrestle with is career. How do they find a career? How do they know what they're going to do? So you can think back to what you were thinking about when you were a student. Where did you think you would be now, career-wise? And what advice do you give students about finding their way through a whole myriad of choices that they have to make about careers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I kind of I always knew I wanted to run something. I remember my management 101 professor, a guy named Ian McMillan. I'd always thought that I would spend 10 years doing something and then having the capital to end up starting something or take risks. And, something that is, I guess maybe at the time, I don't want to date myself, but, at the time, something that was pretty obvious that he sort of stated, he's like, look, your best time to try something and do something more bold is when you're earlier on in your career. 10 years after you get started and you're making that cushy salary, taking a risk and doing something new is, you're giving up a lot more. The opportunity cost is high versus when you don't really know any better. And so, like I said, although I found that compelling, I still went and worked at a company, and kind of, and find I think the reality is, long story short, I think people have a calling inside themselves, inside what they ultimately want to be. If you listen to that inner voice and actually follow that inner voice, I think you're going to be, and I think students are going to find out what they want to do and be super successful at it. I always wanted to do and run something. And like I said, I was unsuccessful to start, and I wasn't going to completely divorce myself from that vision, even if it takes you a little bit longer to get back on that path and do that. I've always personally found that I do my best work when I'm doing something I really, really enjoy doing. I also found that I work hardest and I strive to do my best when I'm actually really challenged. There's a lot of jobs you can do where you can kind of mail it in, but I think I personally found that, it's just like any class you've taken or whatever. If you decide to take the risk to step up and actually take on more, you kind of depends on personality. But if you're a little bit of I was always the chip on the shoulder. My mother came over from India when she was 15 without a cent to her name, and the whole idea that says, hey, I'm going to prove myself, prove my way in the world, was always a part of that. So taking challenges and seeing if you can stand up to those challenges was always an important part of the way I tested myself. And I'm sure there are other students that'll resonate with. But I've always wanted to do something bigger and bolder, but go back to the example I shared, it's, you get lucks and breaks along the way, and yeah, the harder you work and the more you can put yourself in positions to be successful. Like I said, every now and then you get a break, and I'm very, very, very thankful for the break I got at Diligent. It's been a wonderful opportunity, and it's, I would hope anybody shares enough humility with saying, look, you got there because maybe you worked hard, but you also got there because breaks happened in your way. And, when we talk a little bit about our modern leadership initiative, it's a little bit about, how others can help to create those breaks for you, and how we can make those breaks that people get actually more equal across society.
Great. That's some great advice, especially about what do you do when you fail early on in your career. You don't fold the tents. You look for new opportunities to rise. So that's great.
Yeah, and it's funny. One of the things that, like, you're very much, and I'm sure everybody gets this, but you're very much a product of your experiences. I know that's obvious. Everybody gets that, but one of the jokes we like to have about Diligent. I mean, if I could do like a virtual raise of the hands to, your audience to say who here has ever heard of Diligent, and not many people would raise their hands, but in the lead up or the bio for someone was more than generous to write for me. We're the largest software as a service company that no one's ever heard of. And part of that is, again, go back to the product of your experiences. The company that I'd started before was all hype, zero substance. So when the bubble burst, there was nothing there. And so in the spirit of, I said, if I was going to do something again, I would do it in the right way. And what that has turned out to be is way more substance than hype. And I think you got to find your own balance, and that's not the right balance, either. And so we'll tip the scales a little bit, or you build the confidence to be a little bit more bold as you go. And so yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect transition into talking about Diligent and what you're building there. And as you mentioned, it's probably the largest software firm that no one's ever heard of, or few have heard of, outside of actual board directors. With your permission, we have about a 2-minute video about Diligent as an overview, and we'd like to play that now and then get your comments about to help unpack a little bit about some of the modern governance issues that Diligent is involved with. So Brian, go ahead.
In today's always-on world, executives and directors must tackle the big challenges: increasing competition, complex regulatory environments, and remote work means leaders need accurate information from across their organization to make faster decisions and meet business goals. Governance is no longer just a boardroom practice, it's an organization-wide mandate. That's why Diligent created the Modern Governance Platform, one innovative platform to simplify and digitize your governance practices. From executives and directors to GCs and risk officers, Diligent's platform helps you stay connected, informed, and prepared for what's next. Building upon the world's leading board portal, Diligent's board and leadership collaboration solution allows leaders, directors, and third parties to collaborate effectively on new opportunities and securely manage through any crisis. Always connected. Now directors also have access to peer-to-peer networking and advanced features to optimize board meetings with personalized dashboards, secure real-time communications, and automated workflows. Always informed. Diligent's operational governance solution streamlines global entity management and compliance processes so that teams can collaborate with legal, tax, and finance, visualize corporate structures, respond to M&A activities, and be audit ready. Always ahead. Diligent's advanced governance analytics powers the critical intelligence needed to identify risks, improve board diversity, and make progress on ESG goals. Today, nearly 700,000 leaders around the world trust Diligent to help them move their business forward. Diligent's modern governance platform empowers every leader to drive change, govern at the speed of business, and do the right thing so their organizations can thrive. Always connected, always informed, always ahead. Stay ahead with Diligent.
Very impressive. So,
well, the thing that's most impressive, everything sounds more impressive if it's done with a British accent. So that's the only tip I have from a marketing perspective.
But we know that it's not just all style. There's a lot of substance behind what you do and what Diligent brings to over 20,000 of its customer companies. So what is it that you're trying to build at Diligent? I mean, you're on an amazing growth trajectory, both through acquisitions as well as organic growth with adding partners. And where's that coming from? What's the mandate from your customers to sign up for Diligent software?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we do governance. We do governance software. And what is governance? It's connecting the company to its board. And boards are kind of really interesting dynamics, and governance is a really interesting dynamic where governance is historically something that when people think about board meetings historically, you think about something that happened behind mahogany doors in smoke-filled rooms with historically a not very diverse set of people in those rooms, asking questions and making decisions. And modern governance and what we're trying to build is actually creating more transparency to that, creating more openness to that, creating more connectivity, around that and that notion. And, governance is actually the fabric that helps organizations decide what to do, challenge the management team, make sure you're having the right impact on your stakeholders. And we would argue that there's no one that focuses on that with the scale that we do. And governance is an interesting topic. I had our team do a little just bit of Google research on it, and so I'll ask the team if you were to look the term governance, if you were to actually look up the phrase governance in Google search terms, like what are people actually searching for, and you're actually asked if you were going to look for the most commonly searched for phrase in Google searches that involve the word governance. And actually, the spoiler alert, the most commonly searched for phrase was what is governance? And so it's a phrase that everyone knows, but it's kind of, and we did a whole word cloud and you could look at all the different things. And it was really interesting. It's a word that everybody knows of, but doesn't know exactly what it means or what it feels like. And our job is to do software to actually help to make that more of a reality. And our belief across our team is that if we're able to provide the right information to the right people, create the right transparency across the organization, if you look at who our users are, it's 700,000 most influential people on the planet. It's Tim Cook, it's Warren Buffett, and you can kind of go on and on. And if we can help our smaller, humble, aspiration is if we can help provide them with more information to have them ask better questions and make better decisions, and we can have a real impact on things that matter in the world. Diversity, equity, inclusion, sustainability, climate, things that, our organizations or our largest companies actually touch in a material way.
Yeah. I mean, turning our attention to the Modern Leadership Initiative, it's received quite a bit of press for what Diligent is trying to do in terms of bringing people into boards who normally wouldn't be represented there. And we can all look at the statistics in terms of, for example, Black representation on corporate boards, and it's shocking what a small percentage that is. You've been quoted in the business press as saying this is not a pipeline problem. This is a networking problem. What do you mean by that? And how is that fitting into this Modern Leadership Initiative of Diligence?
Yeah, so really good question. I'd love to say that I'd love to say that we took a much more thoughtful approach to this. It is thoughtful, but it actually was the genesis of it was much more emotional. And I'm sure I like many of your students or many people just sat at awe in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And sat back and said, look, what can I do, as a leader for my company or whatever? And there's plenty that we can do. There's plenty of areas where we can be better. But it was interesting. It was a Monday or Tuesday after, kind of the weekend after. And I was watching an hour of CNBC that I thought was unbelievably powerful, which was, it had three really, really impactful people. Kenneth Frazier, the CEO of Merck. It had Wes Moore, the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, one of the largest foundations in New York City, tied to poverty in New York City. And it actually had Melody Hobson, who is co-CEO of Ariel, which is an investment firm. Since then, she's actually now the chairperson or chairwoman of Starbucks. And I was listening to everyone basically go through their own view of the complexity with unpacking systemic racism and just how complicated and how deep-seated it is within our society. And everybody had their areas that we need to work on, and all of them definitely need to be addressed. But Melody Hobson kind of started out and said, I think really directly, said, look, if we're going to change this, it has to start at the top. And she said, it's just math. The numbers, suck from representation across the largest companies in the world, the mid-market, private equity. You can kind of go all your way through it. We have moved the needle slightly on gender diversity, but nowhere on racial diversity. The numbers are poor. And so we work with nearly 800,000 of the world's leaders, and said, look, we can actually do something. We have an opportunity to move the needle, and that to launch an initiative where we got our users to recommend people who are of racially diverse backgrounds who should be on boards and are not today. We got our clients to post board roles. We started with private equity, who we would argue, quite frankly, had the largest opportunity just in terms of moving the needle and the numbers, just given where diversity was there. And many of our corporate clients have gotten into it. So we think there's a big opportunity to use our network to help to actually provide and create more opportunities for really, really talented people, and provide more of those connections, and use like a network digitally. And look, we don't make a cent from it. We don't charge anyone. It's all free to all of our users and all of the nominees. And you guys will judge us if 2 or 3 years if we actually had an impact, and that's what we aspire to do.
That's great. It's making the change from the top is certainly a different approach compared to, say, DEI initiatives within companies and social movements that are more grassroots. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact this has over the longer term. Related to that, could you talk a little bit about the Diligent Director Network and how that fits into this initiative?
Yeah, so we basically took the idea of what we called modern leadership, which is actually leadership and board that actually looks much more like the employee base of a company, or looks much more like your consumers, and try to wrap a network around it. And that network is a group of all of our users, but is also now a group of the individuals who are nominated to be part of that group. And like, as I mentioned, look, the reality is being a CEO or a C-suite member and or a board member, it is among the most exclusive networks that you could be part of. And our goal with the Director Network is take that exclusive network and make it more inclusive, make it look more like I said, our customers, our workforce, et cetera. And one of the things that I would say, it was an interesting, back to my subsequent conversation with Melody Hobson or other people, there are very, very, very talented people out there that need to get highlighted and opportunities created for them. And so our goal is to help to activate that network of individuals who know those people and help to create those opportunities. And look, if we wanted to go to our own networks, then we'd actually have people who are on boards that look much like we do in our networks of friends. And if we're going to break out of that, we need to tap broader sources, broader sets of talent and bases of talent. And many of those exist. We need to activate our network and work harder. And we've seen a lot of interest and pull and demand for and a push for diversity. And we'll see if we can actually move the numbers and if it will work. And I'm confident it can. The question is just how long will it take?
Yeah, so you don't buy into the myth that the talent is not out there. in terms of women and Black executives. It's the fact that they've not been given opportunities through networks and other factors to be noted for these kinds of positions.
Look, I think you have to reframe what you're looking for. And if you reframe what you're looking for, the talent exists. So historically, a board member was a former CEO or CFO. Well, that's a well-defined pool, and you're not going to find diversity within that group. But if you look and branch out beyond that, and a really talented person who ran a law firm, a really talented individual at a consulting organization, whether you look at it as someone who brought a unique angle around digital transformation, around marketing. Like I think we can redefine what expertise should look like. And I think the reality is, I think your board should end up being a group of individuals who can help you better see around corners. The idea is you want to put together a group of individuals who come from different backgrounds and think differently, who can help you see things that you don't see. And if every single person on there is a CEO or CFO, they're not going to help you see something differently than the university professor, the historian, look, I think we would all admit that if more companies had health professionals, infectious disease specialists, whatever else it might end up being, maybe there's ways that we could have navigated what 2020 and rolling into 2021 was, in a better or different or in a different way, let me say.
Yeah, well put. Something that's really impressive about this initiative is the number of private equity firms you've been able to bring on board, over 20, who have signed on, if not literally, then in spirit to this initiative. How do you approach these private equity firms? What's your spiel, for lack of a better word, in terms of why they should be involved in an initiative like this?
Yeah, it's to be candid, the conversations have happened. There's two flavors of conversations. People who totally get it, and they get it, and they get the need, and they reflect on the fact that if you're fortunate enough to connect with someone who actually or an organization that has a self-awareness associated with yep, you're right, we could absolutely do a better job. You're right. And now is the moment from it going from a nice to have to an imperative. And that's awesome. That is a recognition. And then if you can help to make it easy for them to actually do the right thing. And that's the whole goal of the Modern Leadership Initiative and Director Network. How do you make it easy for someone to do the right thing? So no one has to ever say, we couldn't fill a diverse slate. So again, the conversations were pretty binary. There's a set of people who are like, yes, totally, you're right. We've been meaning to get better. We need to get better. We're on board. Or there's a set of conversations that were like, well, we're not really sure. And as hard as I pushed a lot of the we're not really sure, and the reality is, I think we're approaching a place where there are so many more organizations or people who fall in the bucket of, yes, we should be doing something. Yes, we should be better. And ultimately, separate on the private equity side, but even if you look at it on a company perspective, we all know this. Increasingly, we want to buy from companies that have the same values that we do. We want to work for companies that have the same values we do. And ideally, you have leaders who get that, who talk to their customers, who talk to their clientele, who talk to, stakeholders, government, like local, et cetera. And, people want to work with organizations. People want to team up with, buy from organizations who get it. And so ultimately, we think doing the right thing will result in better performance for companies over time. And we'll push hard on all organizations. But unfortunately, the conversations were binary, and there were a lot of companies or organizations who said, totally, we should be doing the right thing.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. As a second order kind of consequence of modern leadership, do you think it'll enhance the trust that shareholders and stakeholders have in boards? And one of the things that I've heard in terms of the rise of activist shareholders is that they've lost trust. They've lost faith in a lot of boards. Do you see this as possibly helping address that?
Yeah, look, it's I think you raise a great point. It's a continuation of the at least the way we view things, which is it's all about transparency. And the reality is, if you're an investor, activist or otherwise, and you feel like a company is being transparent with you around, the initiatives they're driving, what the demographics of the workforce are, how they're looking to shape it over time, the impact of their initiatives on climate, on resources, et cetera. The more an organization is open around that, the more an organization actually gives you that view. It engenders more trust
Yeah.
because an organization says they have nothing to hide, and that works from a CEO to his or her board. That works from a CEO to his or her team, and that makes for CEO to his or her shareholders. And I think that is the push. And we ultimately, as a technology provider, we provide technology to make it easier for CEOs, for companies to actually create more of that transparency. So they have the visibility into their organization and they can share that visibility more broadly with other individuals. Because, I mean, look, there are many versions of this, but when you shine light on things, when you take things out of the dark, it sets things up it makes things better. And so that's the goal. And there are too many things that, again, that smoke-filled, conference room, the organization that operates in the shadows of a country or whatever else it ends up being, like shine the light, and it'll cause everyone to up their game, and it'll help to engender progress.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And we hear a lot about ESG, environment, social governance, as being, something that's driving a lot of investment decisions these days. And there tends to be, I think, kind of a bucket list thinking that there's environment, there's social, there's governance, and those are three separate things. But the way you talk about it in terms of transparency, that it's really the transparency that unites those three things as a more cohesive whole. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I think that's exactly right.
All right, very good. Well, let's, before we turn things over to questions and answers, I just have a couple of other questions for you to pontificate. And one is, what is the future of the board? I mean, we're in times that the future of work is changing so dramatically. We've, as an organizational psychologist, we've talked for, it seems like forever, about the future of work, the future of work. Future of work is here. And it's changed within the last year in ways that we're just beginning to try to understand. What are the implications for the future of boards?
Yeah, so if you follow the basic trajectory of governance or trajectory of a board role over the last 5+ years, it used to be a really cushy role where you didn't have to do anything. It is increasingly not the case. The cushy role where you get to show up to a boondoggle 4 times a year is now something where you're constantly on calls. You have increased focus from, as you noted, activist investors, but from regulators, from employee groups, et cetera. And the waiting to receive a really thick, thorough briefing document and allow you to pontificate for a while and respond is no longer there. Things come at you really, really quickly. I mean, we've seen it over the course of 2020 and in 2021. Issues just happened quickly. You had to respond. You had to have your game, and which means that you got to have your A game. You got to be prepared on a much more frequent, on a weekly basis, as opposed to 4 times a year. And there's nothing that would lead me to believe that is actually going to go in the other direction. Yeah. I would expect, that only that intensity increases, those expectations increase, and what you expect of those individuals increase. So I think that is it's also the dynamic too, where anybody who wants a board role will be like, there's a component that is, I spend all the time with our users, and be careful what you wish for. It's cool, but there's a lot that comes from it and a lot of scrutiny, et cetera, and as it should.
Yeah. And the final question that I have before we go to Q&A with our students is kind of back to the student focus. We're in an educational institution. We have responsible leadership as one of the key cornerstones of the mission of Claremont McKenna College. How do you see what Diligent is doing with modern leadership, potentially influencing or otherwise informing how we educate the next generation of leaders?
It's a good question. As you well know, I mean, so much of the education of leadership comes from, so much of it is experiential. And I do think that there's so much of a phenomenal education that sets people up to actually go and take in all those experiences. And, you give people the tools to set them up for success. And then ultimately you go in the world and everybody, you just got to friggin' figure it out. And so I think there is, I think that hasn't changed. I think that still persists. I think I think if you go back to just the transparency, awareness, et cetera, I think the thing that I think universities have been dealing with for a while. This isn't but just I think just becomes more acute. Is not everybody who comes to a university comes from the same playing field, and very often when you come to a university, you're supposed to be able to get that melting pot experience, and very often when people come to university, everybody gravitates to people that are a little bit more like them. And I think how you can break that up and create those networks that actually supersede where you came from, that ultimately will set you up for success going forward. If I go back to, it's how do you help to create opportunities to put people in environments where they can expand their networks. That's why people go to incredible schools like this one. And so I think it's part of setting people up with the right tools. I think it is, so much increasingly that network, which university has done for a long period of time, but also cross-pollinating that network a lot. So everybody leaves with the same breadth of experiences. And, and hopefully the schools or the companies that come and recruit from the school as well, I'm sure are increasingly looking to be more fair and balanced in kind of the type of individuals they look for and recruit and kind of, so I think it's all those things that are heading in the right direction. How you do that, how you navigate what that looks like, is all for people much, much smarter than I.
I like what you're saying about thinking about the diversity metric of your network and how that's an important component of who you are and how you will lead. So thank you for leaving us with that. I'm going to turn it back now to our Ath Fellows who've been collecting questions from our students primarily. And if you could indulge us for another 20 minutes, Brian,
sure.
I'll turn things over to Will and Chris and Nadine for Q&A.
Thanks so much to you both for the conversation. We're going to get things rolling with a question from an alumna who writes in to ask, what is the largest barrier to diversity in the boards and senior management ranks of Fortune 500 companies? And in particular, she asks for your thoughts on a recent poll that indicated that a plurality of respondents thought that the largest barrier to diversity in the asset management industry is the applicant pool. More diverse people need to be persuaded to join the industry.
Yeah, really good question. I think a lot of it, or let me take a flip side on the question. The reason that people most often cite for not being able to add diversity to their board is the industry language is they couldn't fill a diverse enough slate, which is which is someone didn't have enough individuals with a broad enough background where they felt they could appropriately choose the individual. And I would just challenge that notion. I think if you can't do that, you're probably not being broad enough in your definition of what you're looking for an individual. And so I was talking to an individual who runs a really successful software company in Seattle, and he's filled an incredibly diverse team. And I was asking him why. What did he do to do that? And he said, "Look." He said, I work, he said, look, I worked really, really, really hard. He's a Latino. He said, and it was really, really important to him to make sure that he could fill out, a very, very diverse team. And he said, it just took much longer to find the right people. He said, the right people are out there. You just got to push yourself and find the right people. And I appreciate it. Then I flipped it around, and I didn't even have to ask him, well, why did you do that? Why was that important to you? He volunteered it on his own. He's like, look, I compete with Microsoft. I compete with Amazon. Seattle is an incredibly competitive environment, and we win now because everybody knows we have the most diverse team. And so, like, I appreciate the pushing it back into, why are you doing this? Like, what's the goal of it? And the goal is goodness. But I appreciate that he said, like, through that goodness, he thinks his company will perform better and he'll be more of a magnet for talent. So I would respectfully ask people to just try harder, even if it takes you longer. Try harder. Good people are out there, and I think you just have to work harder to fill those roles.
Next question is from an alum as well, asking, could you share more about how large search firms have partnered with your network to reach out to DEI candidates?
When we set up our Modern Leadership Initiative, the goal was to make it to be completely inclusive. And by inclusive, I mean any private equity firm who wanted to join, as we kind of noted, who actually wanted the give to get to join, was you had to be willing to create 5 incremental rules for racially diverse board members. And so that was kind of the give to get. For recruiting firms, they had to be able to post all of their board roles in our application. So as much as we're reaching out to individuals, asking them, as much as we're reaching out to our board member users and asking them to suggest people who are diverse, who are not on boards that should, when they come to the network, I want to make sure that they have roles they can apply to, roles they can look at and see. And we did have a good dialogue. I won't speak to which search firm, but good dialogue around people wanted exclusivity. It said, no, we'll do it. We'll post our roles, but it's only going to be for search firm X. And so that's not how you drive change. It's got to be more open source and got to include other firms. And so we were able to take our hard line and actually be able to partner with a pretty great set of top tier search firms as part of our network. And I think there's more we can do to continue to partner, but it all comes to creating opportunities for individuals.
Next question is, what is the importance of diversity and age in leadership of companies?
Let me speak to the board and then the leadership side. I think there's a huge opportunity on diversity of age. Diversity of age is less talked about than racial or gender diversity. And it's an area where, look, the average age of a board keeps going up every year. Part of that is the law of large numbers. If everyone is 65, the vast majority of those people turn 66 and the whole base gets older. I think there is opportunity for diversity of age. The unique dynamic of it is you want someone on your board who has a wealth and breadth of experience. And so that has some sort of, however you define experience, but it comes with some sort of working track record. But I think there is a lot of opportunity to add diversity of age across teams. In terms of, across boards, across leadership teams, look, it's that one ends up being a little bit tougher because the board typically wants to make the safe choice, and the safe choice tends to be the person who has more experience. But that might not be the right choice. And I think, again, it goes back to the board side, where if you have enough diversity on your board, if you have people who have different experiences, if you have different age, going for the person who just had the most experience may not be the right option to actually lead the organization. So I think if you have the right board composition, it'll actually, I think companies will make more better decisions, and that might be to lean towards a candidate who maybe doesn't look like all the others. However you define doesn't look like all the others.
Next question from a student. A lot of students are disillusioned with corporate D&I work because they see corporate power as one of the primary sources of racial injustice in the United States. So real progress can only be made through alternative institutions. What should the kind of work you are doing be a focus of, or no, sorry, why should the kind of work you are doing be a focus for racial justice in 2021?
Look, I totally get the notion of being disillusioned when you look across different organizations and you say, look, why do the people at the top not look like me? Like it's easy to get frustrated and opt out. Look, I think the flip side of it would be, I think there are organizations that are trying to improve things, trying to make things better. And I think your decision to buy from those companies, work for those companies, I think will, you have the ability to decide how things play out based on, how you vote and whether it's vote where you who you purchase from and where you work and make successful. And so that may be a little bit of a much more longer term view or longer term perspective, but I'd rather opt in and kind of vote for how you can make progress. But I'm totally empathetic to a look at the world that says the deck is stacked. I totally empathetic to that. But I would love more people who want to lean forward and say, I can make a difference. I can have impact. And every now and then that's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I recognize that. But I think that's still true. I think the potential still exists.
Our next question comes from an alumnus who's wondering how you think that white board members should think about their role in light of the increasing focus on diversity and inclusion among board personnel.
How should white board members feel? Let me take the question and answer it in a slightly different fashion, maybe. I think many old school board members, let me characterize it that way, realize that there's a massive generation of new board members who are going to come in, and that will create fewer opportunities for those old school board members. Like, I think that is the reality. And so, and candidly, look, I think that's a good thing. I think that creates opportunities for others. And so, I think many individuals recognize that is true and recognize that they may be on one of their last boards or might not get that next plum board seat because it's going to go to someone who brings something different to the board than they might bring. And, it's where we are. I think it's what's important. And I think people realize that.
Next question. You said that consumers increasingly want to buy from companies who share their values, so companies have an incentive to do the right thing. How should companies navigate situations where the majority of their consumers' values do not reflect what they think is the right thing? How can we assume that consumers' values are the right ones?
I tend to be a bit of a marketplace person. And so if your consumers have values and they want to buy from organizations that represent those values, and you as a large old school company don't want to meet those, I'm pretty darn sure some other company is going to better meet those needs and meet those values. And so, I'll give you another flavor of the same thing. And I think climate and the focus on climate is going to be such a major initiative over the next 10 years. And one of the talks that I'll give to some of our clientele is you can approach this in one of many ways. You can either say you as a CEO or a company are passionate about helping to invest in initiatives to help to create more sustainability. You can be an organization, and you can do it because you feel passionate about it. You can be an organization that says, even though I don't feel passionate about it, I know there's a lot of people in our stakeholder group that care a lot about it, be it our employees or be it our customers. Or you can actually be the individual who says, look, I'm going to do it because I actually think that regulation is going to come and I'd rather get ahead of it. Any of those three different reasons, and I think all of those three are coming, would lead you to believe that you should do the right thing and lean forward and move for progress. Or you can be the fourth organization who says, I just don't want to do it. And that just seems like you choose whatever should motivate you, but that's the writing on the wall. And that's where the world is heading. And you can be super contrarian, or you can say it is the right thing. And I'll choose which reason I actually want to tack into the wind on, because that's where the world is heading. And I want to be part of the change as opposed to be resistant to it.
Another question from a student. You described your long and successful career in technology entrepreneurship, and you're clearly an expert about that. But how have you gained your expertise on diversity and inclusion issues?
I can answer in a few different ways. I mean, look, the reality is listening and talking and surrounding yourself with people who will tell you like they see it. So I think that's probably. Now the reality is it's ultimately in large part shaped by your product of your experiences. I mentioned earlier my mother came to the U.S. from India when she was 15. She came to Westport, Connecticut, approximately 60 years ago, dressed in a sari and with very dark skin. And she would recognize or recollect many times over what it's like to not feel like she was included. My wife is the CFO of a very large public company. She's a 40-year-old woman, and she has recalled many times across her rise in financial services around the challenge of being a woman and being the only woman in a room full of, people who don't look like, act like, or talk like, or her. And so I think there are a few different experiences that I think have probably made me more open to asking questions, being more intellectually curious, that has made me more open to the fact that not everybody's got it the same way. Not everyone has it as easy. Not everyone has the same opportunities. To be very clear, I would not declare myself an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would consider myself someone who tries to listen, tries to learn, and tries to be more open and get better. But look, I have not walked in the same shoes as many of the people, across the student body. And I fully admit that I've had a lot of privileges and opportunities that other people have not had. And I think understanding that and wanting to create opportunities for other people is at least a start. But I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I'm hopefully one of an increasing set of people who is trying to make things better and trying to be humble and open and listen a lot.
Thank you for your time. Before we wrap things up, do you have any parting thoughts for the audience?
Been a long time since I've talked to a group of students, so it's actually pretty cool and refreshing. I guess the only parting thought I would have is, look, there's a lot of things out there to be jaded about, frustrated about, disillusioned around. But there's a lot to be hopeful and opportunistic about. And I think there's so many cool things about the place that many of you all are at, which is, your future, our world you and many of your classmates across the world will shape that and into whatever it'll end up being. And I think there's a lot of excitement around that. I think there's a lot of cool things. I think that despite, maybe frustrations, and look, the last 4 years have been challenging in many, many ways. Last year's been challenging in many ways, but I think there's hope. I think there's a lot of good things to be had. And I actually think the world is more open to change now than it has been in a really, really long time, at least over the last short horizon. So the only parting thoughts I'd say is there's a lot of cool stuff you guys can do and build. And I can't wait to see what you guys shape and make out of your college years and your post-college years. So I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity.
On behalf of Claremont McKenna College and the Athenaeum, thank you all for joining us tonight. A special thanks to Brian Stafford and to all those who sent in questions. Don't forget to join us for our next virtual Ath event, which will be on Thursday, March 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific. Dr. Vinay Prasad will discuss the controversial subject of reopening schools. Thank you and have a good evening.